Howdy folks. Smoky Scotch is a very popular category of Scotch. It's very boldly flavored, kind of a love it or hate it type of situation, but I've got 5 different bottles here that if you like Smoky Scotch, you may not have heard of these and you might really like them, so I'm going to tell you all about them. Let's go. So these are some lesser known scotches and whiskeys. I'm hoping to turn you guys on to some stuff you maybe haven't heard of yet. So we're gonna start on the island of Islay with actually an unpeated scotch. Just because it comes from Islay doesn't mean that it has to be peated. They can do different styles there. And just because it's peated doesn't mean it comes from Islay. So you can make peated scotch in other places. So this first one we're going to try is called Bunnahabhain. And one of the things that I love about like an Islay Scotch is not only the smokiness, but it's also got this sort of briny, kind of almost salty character to it, which is really nice. And this Bunnahabhain has the brininess. It has the sort of maritime air to it, but it doesn't have the smoke. So it's pretty interesting. The peatiness of some Islay Scotches can be a bit overwhelming, and this Bunnahabhain is actually a lot more subtle. So let's give this a taste. All right, Bunnahabhain 12-year unpeated Islay Scotch whiskey aged in ex-bourbon and sherry casks. I mean, not an overwhelming smell. A little bit of that sherry from the barrel, like a sort of vanilla, like very, very mellow. Like a caramely vanilla, but just a little hint of that sort of like briny, almost seaweed kind of flavor. It's got like a sweet finish from the barrel and the woody notes. Bunnahabhain's weird. It almost fools you into thinking it is peated. Like you almost think you can detect a little bit of peat, but I think it's just because of that sort of salty brininess that's coming through at the end. I love it. You wouldn't think it was from Islay because obviously it's not smoky, but it still reminds you of those in a certain way. It's kind of a little bit hard to describe, but Bunnahabhain is great. I really recommend it. All right, but we're gonna move on because I gotta get through 5 of these. The next 2 we're gonna do sort of at the same time. They're sort of similar in a certain way now. We're moving off of Islay. We're gonna go to the Isle of Mull. On the Isle of Mull, there's a distillery called Tobermory. Now, what they do at Tobermory Distillery is they normally do unpeated whiskey, but once or twice a year, they switch and they start making peated whiskey. And when they make their peated whiskey, they call it Ledaig. The bottle I have here is Ledaig 10-year. It comes in at 46.3% alcohol, which is actually the same as Bunnahabhain. And it's a fairly heavily peated whiskey. But before I go on and taste that, I want to tell you about Longrow, because Longrow comes from the Springbank Distillery, which is actually in Campbelltown. So at Springbank, they make 3 different labels. They have the Springbank, which is lightly peated Scotch. They have Longrow, which is more heavily peated, and they have Hazelburn, which is a not peated at all and triple distilled. I only have a sample of this Longrow that I got from my brother-in-law, but I thought it would be fun to include it in this comparison. But first, this is Ledaig 10-year. It's very smoky on the nose, sort of a very rich, complex kind of smokiness. Not quite the same sort of brininess that you get from other Islay Scotches, but it's a little bit spicy. It's got sort of a bit of a hotter finish, a little bit just slightly bitter at the end, but it leaves you with a sort of a smoky sweetness at the end of the sip. I mean, that's amazing. It's really good. It isn't quite as sort of over the top as some of the other like super duper peated ones, but it's really very complex, very nice. If you like smoky Scotch, you should check out Ledaig. So let's move over to Longrow, the peated one from Campbelltown. You don't get quite as much smoke on the nose, but it's sort of, yeah, I don't know, is it a fishiness? You get sort of a very briny kind of smell to it. Longrow is really, really good. It's smoky, but not over the top, and but it's much more complex. It doesn't have that sort of slightly bitter note that Ledaig has. It lingers quite a while on the palate. There's a certain sort of, I don't know, biscuity fish and chips kind of quality to it. That's a bit odd. I'm not sure if I mean that, but it's delicious. Longrow, so far Longrow's might be my favorite, but so moving on, this is Kilchomen. We are back on Islay for this one. It is a heavily peated bottle, comes in at 50 ppm. That's 50 phenols parts per million. That's basically a measurement that they do when they malt the barley. They're putting that on the bottle, and you can find out the ppm of certain smoky scotches. Important to note, though, that that is the parts per million of the phenols when they malt it. So that's the raw materials they're making it from, and then the smokiness can be affected by, blending and aging and how they're distilling it and how they're fermenting it, all that stuff. But that sort of number will give you a sort of a clue as to how peaty it is. 50 ppm is right around where Laphroaig is, just under Ardbeg, and then some of the very, very, very peated ones like Ardbeg Supernova or Octomore, those are more up in the 100, 200, 300 range, which is kind of bonkers. So this particular bottle is a single barrel from a local liquor store finished in a port wine cask. Now you're probably not gonna be able to find this particular bottle of Kilchomen, but there is one that they make called Mahir Bay that's the heavily peated 50 ppm one. You should be able to find that if you can't find this, which you won't. Now, Kilchomen is actually a relatively new distillery. They were only built in 2005, but they built it on a barley farm. So this is actually the only distillery that can actually do all the parts of their process. So growing the barley, harvesting the barley, fermenting, the whole bit is all happening right there on their farm. They sometimes call it a single farm whiskey. Now, not all of their whiskey is from the farm. They can't produce enough barley for their whole operation, but they have a certain bottle that's called 100% Islay that is all of their own farm-grown barley, so that's kind of neat. But onto this. Now, the first thing we notice about this is the color. It is definitely sort of a slightly redder color, which is obviously from the port cask. This one is 56%, so a little bit higher than the rest. This is aged 8 years. Let's give it a taste. Not overwhelmingly smoky on the nose. I mean, dark fruits, stone fruit maybe, figs, stuff like that. Let's give it a taste. Okay, this one a little bit hotter than the others. It's got, up front, it's like a sort of a fruity sweetness, like figs or cherries, sort of these sort of dark fruits at first, and then it's got sort of a smoky aftertaste. The smoke is still lingering on the back of my mouth. But it isn't like, even though it's 50 ppm, which should be a lot, it isn't like overwhelmingly smoky. Again, it's like, it's more subtle, and it comes in towards the end. I mean, it's still got all those sort of smoky Islay qualities you're used to, but just not smashing you in the face. I feel like the port cask had a big effect on this one, but go check out the other Kilchomen bottles, because this is a quality place, and these are delicious. So, okay, finally, I've got one last bottle to tell you about. It's actually not Scotch at all. It's called Paul John, and it's from India. So sometimes when you see places who are making smoky whiskey, peated whiskey outside of Scotland, oftentimes what they're doing is buying malt from Scotland and distilling it wherever they are. But according to their website, these guys are taking 6-row barley from the Himalayas and making whiskey out of that. Now, I've had this bottle for a while. I've got this one for my other brother-in-law who enjoys it a lot. I hadn't really had a chance to talk about it, but we're talking about it today. Again, not overwhelmingly smoky, kind of a lot of sort of apple flavors, like green apple maybe. A little bit of like a sort of a caramel apple. Let's go with caramel apple. Very clean, very light. Smoky, but not crazy smoky. Like a sort of slightly different character to the smoke. It's more of like I don't know, more of like a cooked meat than like a charred piece of wood, if that makes sense. And a lot of apple, like heavily like green apple, like a smoked green apple, I guess, is what I mean. And this is pretty good. It recently came available in Oregon, and if it's here in Oregon, it might be in a lot of other places. So keep your eye peeled for Paul John Indian Single Malt. Conclusions. I think that if you like smoky whiskey, you like a Laphroaig, you like an Ardbeg, you like a Lagavulin, try exploring some of the slightly less over-the-top smoky scotches. There's unpeated Islas you could try. There's less peated things. There's peated things from other islands, other places, other parts of the world. You know, spread out a little bit, try something new. That's my advice for this video. Okay, hopefully that was fun and or informative. Thanks for watching. If you've got anything you'd like me to try, put it down in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Oh, you like smoky scotch? Maybe you should try some Laphroaig fudge, huh? How about that?